Hey everybody, two Alpha Gals here. I'm Debbie Nichols.
And I'm Candace Mathis, and you're listening to In the Tall Grass, where we're sharing stories of reinvention, resilience, and rediscovering joy.
Whether it's facing Alpha Gal syndrome or any other redefining chapter of life, we all have to learn how to navigate the journey through the tall grass. So here we go.
Before we get started today, we wanted to remind you all that tick season is in full swing, so don't forget to take extra precaution when heading outside. Insect Shield provides a variety of products, including everything from repellent to gear, and right now they're offering our listeners a 15% discount with the code 2AlphaGals. That's TWO Alpha Gals. Visit them at insectshield.com.
So since long before Candace and I started our journeys with Alpha Gal syndrome, we have been dedicated to protecting and nurturing our own mental health. And for me, that means counseling and therapy, meditation, especially with my sheep and chickens, and tapping. And even though I'm pretty comfortable with where I am personally on the journey, I continue to see my therapist, and that helps me keep myself in check for when a stressor does come up.
Yep. And I would echo that. And you can imagine how excited we were to connect with Dr. Paige Freeman. Dr. Freeman is an allergy-informed psychologist from Houston, Texas, with a clinical focus on the treatment of anxiety, including food allergy stressors. Dr. Freeman, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I always have a really fun time with you guys. I'm just so happy and grateful that we connected whenever we connected. I can't remember, I think over a year ago now.
I think so. It has been quite some time. And you were just so wonderful to just jump on board with helping the Alpha Gal community. And we were so grateful for the article that you contributed, The Psychological Impacts of Living with Alpha Gal Syndrome, which we know firsthand how stressful all of this can be. So can you talk to us a little bit more about the normal stressors that we might experience, how some of those influence our daily life, especially living with Alpha Gal syndrome?
Yeah, so living with food allergies in general is very stressful. And I really am so glad to be of help because there is an enormous need in the allergy community as well as in the AGS community for some acknowledgement of the difficulty of going through this and just really how psychologically painful it can be and all of the different particulars with Alpha Gal syndrome that lead to that. So I guess I'll just start off with kind of just one of the most basic things is the experience of having an anaphylactic reaction or even just a reaction at all. Having just even a gastro reaction and I don't want to say just a gastro reaction because a gastro reaction can be very enormously debilitating. But a mild, say, hives or a mild upset stomach or whatever chronically is very stressful, especially if you don't know where it's coming from. And that's just on the mild end. There's also anaphylaxis, which is a multi-system reaction that is very dangerous and very scary, that requires the use of epinephrine to halt the reaction. And anaphylactic reactions in particular can be very traumatic for people because it is a life or death situation. And so that is one of the criteria for actually post-traumatic stress disorder. And so just even the experience of having a reaction is in and of itself very hard. But then you add in with Alpha Gal, there's more of an unpredictability with what and when you are going to have a reaction. And so there's a variability in the different mammalian products or just byproducts that will give you a reaction. Different people in the community have different levels of reactivity. And there is also the delay of the onset, which leads to a lot of anticipatory anxiety that's very difficult. And for people that don't have alpha-gal syndrome, just imagine realizing that you ate something that could lead to a life or death situation, and then just having to wait for hours and hours and hours to see if that is going to actually happen. And you can imagine the stress that's involved in that. It's just really, it's extraordinarily difficult.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I know Debbie and I have both experienced that firsthand, especially in the beginning when you're still trying to navigate understanding what your reactions are and your body metrics and all of that. So I think that is such an important factor to understand, especially if you're not in the alpha-gal community.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about a specific situation that I had where I had chicken sausages. And it was only after I ate them that I realized that they were in a pork casing. And it was really just waiting out that time to see if I was going to have a reaction because of this anytime versus every time reaction with alpha-gal syndrome, and just not knowing, how much of that time do you spend freaking out? It's hard to handle that time. But, anaphylaxis aside, I just wanted to acknowledge something that you said. When you're talking about the range of reactions, thank you so much for acknowledging that even the mild reactions can be really stressful. Candace and I, it's funny because we often talk about the GI symptoms, right? Because they can lead to some pretty funny stories after the fact, but it's really stressful driving home from the grocery store, not knowing if you're going to make it to the bathroom or not. And so thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah. It's chronically stressful. And really, as we're talking about this, I think a really good word to focus on in terms of the difficulty of this diagnosis is uncertainty. There's so much uncertainty across different aspects of stress, that we're going to cover, but uncertainty of the reaction, uncertainty of not knowing for on average 7.1 years from the onset of symptoms. 80% of people do not get a diagnosis for 7.1 years.
Right.
That is 7.1 years of not knowing what the hell is going on with your body.
Yeah.
Is that all allergies or is that alpha-gal syndrome?
That's alpha-gal syndrome. And that was done by, and it's, I think the correct statistic is 80% of people, it takes on average 7.1 years for a diagnosis. Now, I think that study was done in 2017. What I hope is that with more knowledge, more physicians being educated about the symptoms, that 7.1 years, you guys, but that number goes way down. That's what I'm hopeful of. And what's super cool is that you guys are a part of that.
That's our hope. to shorten, the time between symptoms, diagnosis, and then diagnosis and joy, right? Relief, joy. Yeah. And all of that. And I think Debbie and I have talked about this numerous times that our journeys took well over 10 years. We didn't know it at the time, right? Like we were kind of going down all of these other rabbit holes and trying to get a diagnosis. And it did end up being due to alpha-gal syndrome. So it's critical. And we're so grateful that you're bringing, awareness also in the mental health community. It's like our collective voice, right? That we're all a piece of the puzzle and helping to alleviate just unnecessary suffering for people for so long. Yeah. So yeah, it's so important. And I think there is that cascade, right? Of reactions, of symptoms, and then it kind of compounds to, I'd love for you to dive a little deeper into the more of the allergen and avoidance and kind of what happens in that cascade almost.
Well, so food allergies in general, you obviously have a degree of avoidance and vigilance that you need to have. With alpha-gal syndrome, just the breadth because it is all mammal, is much bigger than your average food allergy. And as you guys know, you're having to be extra vigilant about products that you're using. You have to be, like you just said, Debbie, about the casing of the chicken sausage, right? And there's so many potential dangers in a really just an all-encompassing way. I mean, really, even to the point that some people are fume reactive. And so even if you are sure at a Mexican restaurant that you have ordered the right thing, they are vigilant, you trust them, you've been there a million times before, and somebody walks by you with sizzling fajitas, that could actually lead to a reaction.
That exact thing has happened to me.
Has it really?
It was fajitas. Yeah, it was steak fajitas. They walked
I just made that up
off the top
of my head.
That's funny. That was like my most recent bad reaction.
Yeah. And it's so true. And thank you for bringing that up, because that is a piece of this that I think gets overlooked a lot, especially in the medical community, and I am also fume reactive. So it's so important. And we're actually in Georgia right now visiting with friends. And we were talking last night, there's some local like breweries here. And my friend said, well, this one actually they smoke meat there outside. And so just trying to, navigating that with friends and family. And it makes me feel happy and validated that I surround myself with people that understand the severity of this, because it is so complex. And when you are fume reactive, it brings on a whole nother layer of anxiety of having to pre-plan and overthink your every move and where you're visiting. So thank you for bringing attention to that.
Yeah. Another thing that is very stressful for a lot of people is the financial commitment that this takes to navigate, all the way from, going back to that 7 years of doctor's visits and different specialists and different tests. Most people are running the gamut trying to figure out what is going on. And, even if you are insured and everything, there's copays, there's deductibles, there's out of pocket. And then also financially that's important is that there are a lot of specialized products, vegan products, which tend to be more expensive, and also just everything from hair products to lotions to anything that you put on or in your body needs to be I guess what I'm trying to say is that oftentimes to make sure that your food has in it what it says it has in it, and products, those things are more expensive. Mm-hmm. And so there's that part of the financial toll. And then even when you are talking about just over-the-counter medication, you are having to really be vigilant with vitamins and everything else. And that goes back to the organic and vegan and everything else. And so just overall, just living your life is more expensive to avoid a reaction.
Yes, I think that's very true. And, I had forgotten about the cost that it took with all the doctors, because you just chalk it up as something you're supposed to pay for to try to get better. But, if I were to go back and add up all the copays from all the specialists and the hospital visits prior to knowing about alpha-gal syndrome, that would be a pretty penny.
Yes, substantial. I mean, I'm thinking back to when I made an appointment with a functional medical doctor back in 2018 and had literally 24 vials of blood drawn. It was ridiculous. I don't even know how I drove home, to be quite honest with you, but she'd never tested me for alpha-gal. Okay. So had I known to ask, or had I had a medical professional that was aware of testing and symptoms, I then spent a crazy amount of money on supplementation that was all beef and pork derived. And that's what sent me into anaphylaxis. So I have like a graveyard of supplements, so it's this kind of like cycle of spending, especially if you don't know, or your provider doesn't know to test you for that out of the gate,
And maybe even going outside of Western medicine, because Western medicine has really kind of failed you. You know what I mean? Or maybe not failed you, but not been informed or whatever. And, treatments outside of Western medicine are not covered by insurance in most circumstances. Yep. And so then you've got all of that out of pocket too.
Yeah, it adds up really fast.
Yeah. Because I think even looking when you're talking about going outside of Western or even allopathic medicine, sometimes those practitioners are more informed about the sort of outside of the normal conditions. And so I know I seek them out often, hoping that they know more about alpha-gal syndrome than, a regular practitioner. They are expensive. They are so expensive that I often will put it off.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So it does. It's compounded, right? Like all of these stressors just kind of compound in our community and the allergen community, I would say probably as a whole too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you also have the stress of social activity really dramatically changing, or even if it's a newer diagnosis, not exactly sure what you can do and just trying to navigate it in a new way. And, even if you've had it for a very long time, there's always bumps in the road, right? But eating out, obviously, as a society, and really not even as a society, as just a human being, really across cultures, food is where we meet.
Yeah.
Food is where we connect. And there's a rich history of that throughout civilization.
Right.
And so when what you can eat and where you can be when you're eating is affected, and you need to really figure out what that is and what that looks like for you, chances are that at least in some small way, whether it be just, really talking with the waiter beforehand, or in larger ways, like you're talking about, where you are having to kind of really figure out where meat is going to be smoked, and the restaurants that you can go to. And this is kind of a little bit off topic, but something else I wanted to talk about, and the friends that are going to be supportive and not like put out when you can't go to a restaurant that you guys used to go to because that restaurant just isn't good about cross-contamination.
Right. Well, I was just going to say, I'd love to maybe spend a few minutes here because I think it's so important, maybe in a foundational way. Do you have advice to help people step into the confidence to speak what they need? Because that's something Debbie and I talk about a lot, that we have found in our healing journey with this, that is so crucial to be able to surround ourselves with those people that do fully embrace and validate our experience and the severity of it. Do you have any words of wisdom for kind of that first, encouraging people to take that first step? Because it can be a very uncomfortable place, clearly, especially when you're learning yourself, to then be able to have the confidence to speak up for what we need in that moment.
I really think the building block, and just let me know if you want to do a deeper dive into this now or later, but I think one place that I oftentimes start with the people that I see that have food allergies in general and alpha-gal is with themselves and an appreciation for the difficulty of the situation and how you talk to yourself. If you're saying to yourself, oh my gosh, I'm such a pain in the ass. I can't believe that, I'm so high maintenance and nobody's going to ever understand, that people are going to be so annoyed and I'm not going to get asked out anymore. Your response to that in your interaction with other people is going to be very different than if you are telling yourself, you know what, this is really hard and I could really use some support and I deserve support and I deserve to have people that surround me that want to support me. When you kind of reconcile that with yourself, it makes it easier to communicate your needs to other people.
I am so glad you said that, because I think that part of why, when I started on this journey, that I felt that way, that I would tell myself those things that you're saying, I'm a burden, I'm really hard to go out with, so I'm just going to stay back, is that for all of those years where I was waiting for a diagnosis, I was not being validated. I knew how bad I felt. I knew what my symptoms were. And doctor after doctor would tell me there was nothing wrong with me. And so it starts to get in your head, and you start to think that there's nothing wrong with you, that you are the problem. And actually, one thing that really helped me was when I started this out and I would go to a restaurant, we would try this with my family, and I would, approach the wait staff. I'm really sorry, but I have a significant food allergy. My kids started telling me, stop saying you're sorry. There's nothing to be sorry about. This is just something you have, and they should be ready to accommodate you. And so I had to put that into like actual practice, right? I had to practice not saying I'm sorry, or I know I'm really hard to feed, but I need this way. And if you don't have it, it's okay.
Yes.
I have to practice not being sorry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It comes down to like your self-worth, right? Like
Yes.
or feeling like I am worthy. I may not have always been this way, because I've heard that from some people in my life who I don't think it's intentional, but it comes down to this your own internal validation of your worth, right?
Yeah. And, human beings have a very deep-seated need to connect with other people, to feel validated, to feel part of the group. And it's actually a real, like it's a biological need. If you think back to kind of caveman times, if you were not part of the group, you would actually die. And so I may be kind of getting off topic, but we are kind of genetically programmed for survival to have that connection and have that validation of it's okay, you're part of us. And that is so powerful when you realize that this isn't just something that is kind of optional, that connection is something that we deeply, deeply crave as human beings, and an acceptance. And when we're validated, we feel like we have value. And so if you're not being validated by people around you, then you need to find some way to validate yourself and be compassionate towards yourself. So when we talk about compassion, I think it's important to kind of define what that is. And so compassion is being moved by the suffering of other people. And so self-compassion is recognizing that your suffering is difficult and also acknowledging the pain of that suffering. And what I think people do sometimes is they shame themselves for suffering. And they say, mentally, in whatever form it takes, just get over it. Just move on. You're such a wuss. Oh, here's one that comes up a lot. You don't have it nearly as bad as this person or as this condition, that comparison. And here's the thing, human suffering is universal.
Yeah. I think that needs to sink in, right? Like
yes,
one is without
human
it.
Suffering is completely part of the human experience. And I feel like I'm really going to get off on a tangent here, so bear with me.
No.
But to try to negate your suffering is not fully appreciating yourself and your life as it is. And so not only is that incredibly harmful to your emotional well-being and your mental health, it's also not fully experiencing your life.
I think that's so beautiful. And all of that, I don't think you're going off the rails at all. I think that this is so critical to talk about, because it made me think when you were talking about acknowledging and validating your own, having that self-compassion fully, that if you don't embrace that and you don't acknowledge the suffering and the pain and what your needs are, how can you fully reach that level of connection that it's ingrained in us as human beings to have in our experience? How, if you don't acknowledge that, I don't know that that's fully possible. And that, I think, then keeps people in that cycle
Yes.
of not being able to speak what they need. And it's just like this perpetual negative, like dark space.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Perpetual. That's the word I was thinking of too while you were talking, because, Candace, what you just said about stepping into that space and acknowledging what you're going through, with what Paige just said, will open you up to make these connections. And I keep thinking, and then once you make those connections, those people continue to validate you, and it becomes another perpetual cycle, but a good one, right? Like these people are validating, you can make better connections. You meet more people that validate you, you make more connections. And I think that just gets stronger and stronger and tighter and tighter. And it helps in walking this journey.
And something that is related to everything that we're talking about is vulnerability. Because you have to be vulnerable to say, I need help, or to say, this is what I need. And as we're talking about this, I'm wondering just kind of out loud, if you need to have some degree of vulnerability to be validated.
Well, as you're talking about vulnerability, that's what I was thinking too. Like once you get into that space where you say, this is what's going on with me, I need help. I feel like there's a release in getting those words out once you're able to do it. That is validating. That's saying, okay, I have just acknowledged this. Now I've got someone who's going to help me do something about it.
Yes. And to go even further with that, and if this is not the person, then I am going to treat myself in a kind way and find my people.
That's right. Because we're out there, right? And you see that on all levels. I think, you see it in the wait staff. There are chefs who will say, oh, this is a creative challenge. I'm going to make something that's safe for you that you're going to love. And then there are the people that are saying, oh, well, we cook our fries in something. I don't know what it is. Can you just pick something else? You get this across the range, not just your close circle, but everybody, everywhere you're seeing this. And so find people who do validate you. Go to restaurants where the chef does want to cook something special for you.
Yeah. And we see that, like you said, Debbie, across the board. I mean, and if you're not being validated by your medical team, find new people that will listen and that are open, because ultimately you want to shorten that time of suffering. And I think that this is the vulnerability, the self-compassion, it's a crucial step to getting to joy and resilience and all of that. And it starts, Dr. Freeman, with what you're saying in the self-work, right? Like it starts with us.
Yeah. And I'd like to give anyone that is struggling with kind of how to start with self-compassion just a quick thing to remember and try to practice. So I think it's really important for people to slow down. This is not just with AGS, this is with everything, right? And notice non-judgmentally and with compassion what's going on with them. It's just observing what is going on. And it's not saying, oh, I feel sad and I just need to get over it because, there's people dying somewhere else. It's, I am really noticing that I'm sad. And so the first step is to notice it. And then it's to name it, which I just said, you just name what's going on. And then just remind yourself that whatever emotions that you're having surrounding this really difficult navigation of a very stressful chronic medical condition are normal, whatever it is. It's just normal. It's okay. Like this is, and even on that bigger level, like we already talked about, it is human suffering. Humans suffer.
Right.
And it's part of our experience. And I think it can be enormously comforting to really kind of understand that when you are looking at your own suffering, that it's not just you, because it can feel so, when we've got all these big, difficult emotions that come up, it can feel so isolating. And at any given time, there's people all over the world that may be in a different circumstance, but they're feeling very similar to the way that you feel right then.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is so beautiful. One thing I wanted to draw out of what you said was the use of the word normal, because I feel like we're anything but normal, right? There's so much sensationalism around, around food allergies, but around this alpha-gal syndrome, the red meat allergy, dun, 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 you catch it from a tick bite. There is so much that is not normal about it. So to be able to acknowledge the emotions surrounding this are normal, like that gives me so much peace, right? And I feel like I'm a good way on this journey, right? I can handle most of what's thrown at me in this part of my life, I feel like. But to be able, even now where I am on the journey, I feel like just hearing you call it normal to have those emotions, like it gives me a real sense of freedom about it. So thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And it does. And I think when you are given the validation, the sense of peace, it lessens the feeling of isolation.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing, Debbie and I have both been huge mental health advocates long before our alpha-gal diagnosis. And it is, I don't know, I think it's another reason we're just so passionate about bringing this to the forefront, because it seems for us, and from everything that you're saying in this, it's foundational, right? Like if you don't have that piece, for us at least, I don't know how you get to the next step in a way.
Yeah.
Without it.
Yeah.
This is huge. And thank you for kind of diving deeper onto that road of self-compassion. And, because I know we've talked a lot, and it's easy to kind of stop at the word self-care versus self-compassion. Like I never thought about the depth of that. Like, okay, to me, it was self-care going to my therapist or going on a walk or, kind of these things. But the self-compassion piece, I feel like it takes it a step further and into the depth of that. And I'm grateful that you went there and didn't just kind of cover the walk. I don't know, or like, just the kind of the action versus, I think this is just the depth of that.
Yes. So self-care and self-compassion are, self-care has become kind of a buzzword, but they're very different. So self-care is more, I think it's just exactly what you said, Candace. It's more of an action. Like I'm going to go get a mani-pedi, or at least that's what it's come to me.
Right.
Right. But self-compassion is very different. It's very different. Another way to get to self-compassion, if you have difficulty with it, is to imagine someone else being able to kind of like jump into your mind and experience what you're experiencing and how they would feel towards you. I mean, assuming it's a kind person, right? I mean, assuming it's, someone that's nice and supportive and everything.
Right.
And, I oftentimes think that it's helpful to think about you kind of doing that to someone else, like maybe a child or a parent or a really good friend, that if you knew that they were feeling the same way that you were feeling for whatever reason, you would feel enormous compassion for that person.
I think that's a fantastic call to action. And it brings to mind something that my own therapist, like a tool my own therapist has given to me, in that she'll tell me to look back on like 6-year-old Debbie. Like I'll go back and look at my young self and how would I feel as not 6-year-old Debbie? What advice would I give on if 6-year-old Debbie felt that way? And it puts it in a new perspective for me. And so I love that you're suggesting that that's a way to get there, is to imagine someone else or yourself, how you would react, but then also to notice, name, and remind yourself that it's normal.
Yeah. So notice, name, and normalize.
Yeah. Great advice.
Yeah. And looking back and doing some work surrounding when you were a child is so powerful. It's really powerful.
It was a game changer for me.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah.
In here. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a huge connection. I don't know. This could be a whole nother podcast.
I know it really could be. It really could be.
All the things. I mean, I think we've written down probably so many avenues that we could just have our coffee time with Dr. Freeman podcast episode.
I would love that.
So Dr. Freeman, Candace and I, we like to think that we're all about trying to find joy. And one way that we both find joy is through music because, and as I've said 100 times before, it's something that we don't react to with alpha-gal syndrome. It just is a source of joy for us. So if there was one song, either in this moment or for all time, that you could say brings you joy, what would that be?
Well, first of all, I did want to tell you that I listened to your all's podcast and you had a chef on, I think his name is Travis. Is that right?
Yes.
And when you asked him this, I was on a walk listening to the podcast and he said that one of his songs was that Rod Stewart song, Love Touch. And I'm not even kidding you. I laughed so hard. Anybody that was watching me walk must have thought I was crazy because I'm not even kidding you. That is the most random, weird song that is literally one of my favorite songs in the world. It always has been. And it's the weirdness of it that makes it even that much better. So I'm all with Travis on that one, but probably my favorite all-time song. I do not have a very wide taste in music. I'm going to tell you the truth, but whenever I want to get pumped up for something, I listen to that song. Tonight's going to be a good night. I love that song. It really gets me in a great mood. So
that is a good one. And I'm totally going to pass that along to Travis. He is going to love.
We can bond over our love of Love Touch.
That's awesome. Thank you.
I would love that. You guys are so much fun. I mean, I just feel really grateful that we connected. I really do. I really treasure your all's friendship. And I really admire how you guys have really stepped up to give people all the things that we talked about today, to give people a place to go where they know that they can be validated.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And Dr. Freeman, we feel the same way about you. And we are so grateful for your support, not only in this mental health realm, but also just in your friendship with us and your kindness. And thank you particularly today for all this wisdom that you shared with us that we can pass on to people living with alpha-gal syndrome or other allergies, or really any point in their lives where they just need to hear this advice. So we're really grateful for your time today.
Yes.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining us today on In the Tall Grass. Visit us at 2alphagals.com. That's TWOalphagals.com. Or you can find us on Instagram and Facebook at 2alphagals. If you enjoyed listening, please leave a review and help us grow this community.
We're all faced with obstacles on our journey, whether it be food allergies or tick-borne diseases. You might outgrow the reactions, but you won't outgrow the person you become. Ticks suck, but life doesn't have to.